If you're thinking about retirement, you've probably asked yourself a very specific set of questions. How much money do I have? What's my rate of return? How long am I going to live? Maybe what should I be invested in? And those are all really great questions, and they'll have a few things in common. They can all be answered with basic math in a spreadsheet, and they'll have a discoverable answer, and they're all basically about quitting your job. That's what we would call retiring from work. But there's a second set of questions that significantly fewer people ask because they're not yet able to ask them. Their super saver brain simply won't let them go there yet. And once you understand why, I think we'll reframe how you think about retirement planning. If you're new to the channel, my name is Ben Brandt. I've been a financial advisor for almost 20 years, and I want to help make your retirement even better. So there's two ways to fail at retirement. Failure number one, running out of money. All right, that's the one everybody thinks about, and kind of my entire industry is based around it. But failure number two is much less talked about, and that's dying with regret. Things that we didn't get around to do, memories unmade, maybe things unsaid. And those two failures line up really perfectly with what we're talking about today. Retiring from work is really only focusing on number one, right? It's all math and it's all defense. Retiring to something is really more in line with avoiding failure number two. It's subjective and really quite a bit trickier because there's no spreadsheet for it. But those two failures do not behave in the same way at all. Failure number one is pretty noticeable. Nobody looks up from their morning coffee on a Tuesday morning and wonders aloud, I wonder if I ran out of money this week, right? You'd notice, obviously you'd notice. But the funny thing about failure number one is that we worry about it a lot, and it's really the easiest one to avoid. We avoid it in the exact same way that we built our portfolio in the first place. Save a bunch of money, never spend any of it, right? The instinct that got you here, if you're a financially independent super saver, it worked. But it comes with an inherent problem, and that is that there is no off switch. Failure number two, on the other hand, is a lot sneakier. So dying with regret doesn't announce itself, right? There's no sirens or public alert system. And by the time you start to feel it, it's pretty common that you're just too old to do anything about it. We can't just hop in the DeLorean and go back to day one of retirement and try to run it all again and take a mulligan. So picture your age 72, and you start to notice that you just can't get around the way that you used to, right? Your knees hurt, your back hurts, and your wife has been talking about going to Paris for 15 years. And you'll say, well, 8 hours on a plane doesn't exactly sound like a picnic anymore, if it ever did. And you start to think, I wish I could go in a time machine and just go back to age 61 when I felt a lot better and just take the trip. And that's one version of regret. It takes a lot of different shapes, and oftentimes it doesn't all show up at once. But here's what I want you to hear, and this is based on hundreds of recent conversations that I have with retirees. Many of you are thinking this doesn't apply to you, even if you're absolutely certain that you're not the kind of person who's ever going to feel any kind of regret. Even if accumulating money is the whole point for you and you're proud of it, once that seed of doubt starts to germinate, it's usually too late to do anything about it. So look at the difference between these two failures. Failure number one warns you, oftentimes years in advance, and you've got moves to avoid it. You can cut your spending, you can either collect early or delay Social Security, you can work part-time, but failure number two doesn't give you any warning at all. It becomes visible at the exact moment that it becomes permanent, because the thing that makes you notice is the same thing that takes that option away. Many of you are spending all of your planning and all of your anxiety on the failure that we can see coming a mile away. So then why is it that nobody talks about the questions around failure number two? Well, here's what I see. And again, I've had this conversation with hundreds of retirees in 2026 at this point. It's basically all I do these days. A super saver will not engage with failure number two until they're absolutely positively certain that failure number one is completely off the table. I'm not saying they won't address it. I'm saying they can't physically address it. Because there's a louder question in the room, it just takes up all the oxygen. You can sit directly across the Zoom screen with somebody with a few $1 million and start talking about purpose and meaning and fulfillment and all that fun stuff and what the next 20 years might look like, and they'll nod politely and wait for you to finish. Because in the back of their mind, they're still running the same calculation that they've been running since they were 35. Do I have enough? And until that question gets answered definitively, nothing else gets in. And that's why almost every YouTube video you've ever seen about finding purpose in retirement, it just doesn't have the same views. It doesn't have the same sticking power as a video about lifetime income or the 4% rule or how to save on taxes. Because those kind of conversations are more concrete and they possess a noble outcome and thus more staying power in the YouTube algorithm. And I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying I think it's in the wrong order. And here's the trap that creates. If you only ever work on failure number one, you can't help but fall victim to failure number two. You just walk directly into it. And the funny thing is, you walk into it while feeling responsible and careful and while doing everything exactly the way that you were taught. Now, I want to be fair here. If you genuinely haven't cleared failure number one, if your portfolio really isn't quite there yet, then failure number one is where your attention belongs, and maybe this isn't the video for you yet. And that's fine. This is personal finance, not everybody finance after all. But if you are at retirement age and you've been saving hard for 30 years, there's a really good chance that financial independence that hurdle was cleared a long time ago and nobody ever told you. And in the conversations I have with retirees, this is a remarkably consistent pattern. The people who worry the most about running out of money are generally the people who should worry about it the least. They're the ones who retire at 60 and get to 75 with way more money than they started with. They're the ones whose kids are going to inherit a portfolio way bigger than what they started with in retirement. They're simply accumulating as their natural state with no plan and no real end in sight. The people who actually run out of money in retirement are usually dealing with something else entirely. They're dealing with a health event that nobody planned for, or maybe a business that went sideways, a specific family situation, or an improperly diversified portfolio where they kind of went in all in on something strange. It's very rarely a spending pattern. It's almost never the careful saver that runs out of money. And if you've been aggressively saving for decades, you're not in the running out group, you're in the other group. The group that dies with a pile of money and a list of things that they just never got around to doing. Now, I'm not asking you to just go out and take my word for it and start spending. I know that that's not how this works. And honestly, you wouldn't do it if I told you to. You don't out-argue somebody out of a 30-year habit. What actually works here is structure. And that's why I use a guardrails approach with clients. So instead of picking one number and hoping, we get to set an income goal based on a portfolio floor and ceiling. So when markets do well, which is kind of most of the time, we maintain or increase our spending. And when markets drop, we make a modest adjustment and our plan stays intact. But the point isn't really the mechanics. The point is what it does to your brain. When you have a system that tells you when to adjust, you get to stop asking, is this enough? Every single day, have I saved enough? The question gets answered by the plan instead of answered by the default, which is just your general state of anxiety. And that's the moment where failure number one actually comes off the table and we can start working on failure number two. It doesn't happen when we hit a magic number or a magic age or have some kind of a spiritual epiphany. Now, if you're curious about guardrails, I've got a free tool linked in the description. You can download the tool for yourself. As long as you have the most recent version of Excel, the formulas will work and you can look at your own numbers. Now, once failure number one is figured out, then we can finally have the conversation that nobody's had with you yet. Now, before we go there, if you love retirement content, I think you'll love my free weekly newsletter called This Week in Retirement, where I find the best retirement content of the week and I send it to you. It's free. The link is in the description, or you can scan this magic box. So here's the second set of questions about starting to think about avoiding failure number two. You're about to free up 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year. That's about 2,000 hours every year. And there's really no spreadsheet that helps to account for that. So what are you going to do with it? What are you going to do to keep your brain sharp and your body moving? What are you doing that actually brings you fulfillment, and who are you going to do those activities with? Now, the obvious answer is leisure and travel, golf, grandkids, all wonderful activities. I'm not going to sit here and tell you not to enjoy your retirement. But I watched a lot of people try to build an entire retirement out of leisure, and there's a pretty common pattern that I see. And that's that leisure works beautifully for maybe 6 months, all the way up to a year and a half. And then it tends to feel a bit off, where golf stops feeling like a reward and starts feeling like just an average way to fill a Tuesday. And people get a little bit quiet about it because they're embarrassed. They worked 30 years for this exact thing, and now it doesn't feel as good as it used to. How do you complain about doing the thing that you saved up to do? But here's the part that I really want you to understand. These questions about what we're going to do, what are we going to retire to, they get answered for you whether you answer them for yourself or not. If you don't personally decide what your Tuesday looks like, your Tuesday just fills up by default. And what do we fill it with? Well, it's television. It's kind of scrolling on our phone. We fill it with errands that, last year took 20 minutes. Now they somehow take 4 hours because there's just no place else to be. Nobody chooses that specifically. It kind of just happens on its own. That is a retirement written by the path of least resistance. And retirement written by default is the single most common thing that I see in people who did everything else right. So I'll show you what that looks like with an example from two couples. Same age, same portfolio, same last day of work. The first couple is Zach and Kelly. Zach was a bit burnt out. He'd been kind of over everything at work for maybe a year or two before he actually left. And when people asked him what he was going to do in retirement, he said the same thing everybody else says. I'm going to probably relax and travel a little bit, and I'll just kind of figure it out when I get there. No destination, just an exit, retiring from something. Zach claimed Social Security at 62, not because it was optimized in any way, just because it felt safer to have some money coming in, and Kelly kind of went along with it. She did the same thing, in fact. And they took 4% out of their portfolio just because that's what they heard that they were supposed to do, and kind of most years they didn't really even spend it all. And their calendar filled up, not with anything specifically that they chose, but it filled up with, watching Jerry Springer reruns and scrolling on their phone and going to appointments. Kelly kept talking about Paris, but Zach kept saying, we can probably afford it next year. Now there's a second couple, Jesse and AC, and Jesse had her destination named long before her last day of work, and it wasn't a vague one. She'd been volunteering with a literacy program 2 evenings a month for the better part of a year before she retired. And she already knew that she liked it. She already knew the people, and she already had a role waiting for her on her first day of retirement. AC did the same thing, but he did it with a woodworking co-op. And on the money side, they did something that looks a little bit reckless on a spreadsheet. They took bigger withdrawals in their 60s, substantially bigger. They funded real travel, the physical kind of travel that requires a lot of walking and hiking. They paid for a trip with all 3 grandkids, while the grandkids still thought a trip with grandma and grandpa was a fun time and not an eye-rolling contest. They were both very strategic about their Social Security, so they had bigger benefit waiting for them later, front-loading the cash on purpose with guaranteed income coming in behind for support. Now, I want to be really precise about something here because this is where a lot of people push back. Spending an extra $10,000 a year at 65 costs you more than $10,000 at 85. That's true. We're giving up 20 years of compounding, and I really can't pretend otherwise. But that same extra $10,000 is worth more when you're younger. It's worth a lot more. It buys you a trip that your body can actually take, a grandkid who's only 8 once, and a memory made while it's still able to be made. The more expensive dollar, I think in this exchange, is the better deal. It's the better dollar. And that trade is the whole reason you saved up all this money in the first place. Same thing with gifting. I'd rather see you give with warm hands rather than cold hands. Watching your kids use that money is something that a line item in a will is just never going to be able to match. And here's how it turns out. At age 70, Zach and Kelly have way more money than Jesse and AC. On a balance sheet, they look like the winners. If you rank these two couples on a spreadsheet, Zach and Kelly win hands down. But will Kelly ever see Paris? I don't know. Both Zach and Kelly and Jesse and AC, they beat retirement failure number 1 before the first day of retirement. But only Jesse and AC actually graduated their focus to working on failure number 2, while Zach and Kelly spent an entire decade defending against a risk that was just no longer a threat. One of those retirements was built with intention. The other one was kind of built by default. So why am I telling you this at 62 instead of 72? Well, because these questions are so much easier to answer while you're still working. That energy is just completely different while you still have a job. Right now, you've got a team and a calendar and colleagues, and you've got a reason to be somewhere on Monday morning. Answering what am I retiring to from inside of all of that structure is a totally different exercise than answering it from inside of a quiet house on a random Tuesday in March. Think about the first time you drove to work at a new job. You had to think about every piece of that commute. I got to turn here. I got to go 8 miles down this road. I got to stop at the light. I got to signal. You're making decisions the entire way. Now, if we fast forward 10 years, you've made this drive maybe 100 times or a couple hundred times. And some mornings you just kind of arrive at work and you don't even really even remember hitting your brake or using your turn signal or changing lanes. You got there from muscle memory. And that's what I want you to avoid in retirement. Because if you keep operating the same way you did for the last 30 years, 10 years of retirement are going to go by and you'll have treated them exactly like the 10 years before you retired. Still saving, because saving is what you've always been told to do and what you're always supposed to do. And you never actually built a plan for the alternative. Jessie didn't discover that literacy program after she retired. She found it while she was still supported by a steady paycheck and steady health insurance that comes with her career. She still had energy and structure and a life to test it against, and that's why it worked. In his book, Be Your Future Self Now, Dr. Benjamin Hardy writes that we should not be propelled by our past, but drawn forward by a compelling future. And I think that's the whole game. If I had to put retiring to something rather than from something into one sentence, I think that would really be it. Do you want to be propelled by your past or drawn forward by a compelling future? And I make these videos because I've sat across from real people who could have improved their retirement. Not because they needed the money, but because nobody ever asked them a second set of questions while there was still time to act on the answers. If you feel like you've only been planning for failure number 1, which is I don't want to run out of money, or you want a definitive answer to that question so that we can then graduate to planning against failure number 2, which is dying with regret, well, that's exactly what our Retire Ready Blueprint is built around. That's our whole retirement planning process in a nutshell. So if you're curious, you can book a call at the link in the description or scan this magic box. Thanks for watching.